Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the pool, here's another video on the minor pentatonic scale. Now, why is it that we would have to talk about the scale still?
No! No!
We all know it. We all use it. Everybody knows it. Why are we still talking about it? Here's my take on it. The minor pentatonic scale, the pentatonic scale in general, is a 5-note structure. It's a very, very flexible structure because all of the chords, most of the chords that we use, are built from 7-note scales, like the major scale, the modes, harmonic minor, melodic minor, blah, blah, blah. Those scales, since they're 7 notes, they harmonize and they create chords. The pentatonic scale, not so much. It just doesn't have enough notes. However, when you use it as a melodic structure, since it's missing those notes that get sort of squirrely depending on what chord is being built, your chances of hitting a wrong note with the pentatonic scale are lower than they are when you use a 7-note scale. So it's very, very useful. As a very, very useful structure, guitar players have been using it for decades and they got really good at it, right? My favorite guitar players use the pentatonic scale much more elegantly than I do. So there's always something to learn, right? I always have an example of somebody who's better than me, which means I still have work to do, and hence that's why we have yet another video on the minor pentatonic scale. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Chris. Today you will learn the minor pentatonic scale. But I already know the minor pentatonic scale. Like I said, since it's a lifelong study, along that journey there are bound to be epiphanies, new information, a light bulb moment, a aha moment. I'm going to share one of those with you today. Before we get started, if you like this channel, you like the way I teach, you're excited about the information, the experience that I bring, or you just like to support the channel, take a look at Patreon and see what I've got to offer there. You can also get access to my teaching platform called The Studio, and it's there that you can register for live classes that I'm teaching. So if you're interested in getting a little deeper with me, or you just like to show your support, head on over to Patreon and see if you like what you see. And if you do decide to support the channel, I thank you in advance. Okay, this lesson comes from a student of mine named Mark. Mark and I were working on the pentatonic scale, like we're all doing, right? And he was having some difficulty getting through the difference and trying to navigate the difference between a position and a pattern and a scale and a shape, and all of that nomenclature. He was having a hard time getting through that, right? Those 5 different positions and the patterns that they create and the shapes of those patterns and how those shapes are different. So we arrived at a very, very simple way of stripping all that stuff away and looking at the scale with only one single constraint. And that is, which finger do you start the scale on? Do you start it on your index finger or do you start it on your ring finger? Usually those are the 2 fingers that you start the scale on, right? So using this simple constraint, you bypass all of the positions and all of the patterns and all of the shapes of the patterns, and you just think about that one thing. I'm going to play the scale and I'm going to start it on my index finger or I'm going to start it on my ring finger. Let's zoom in and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, the whole idea here is taking the cognitive load out of mapping the pentatonic scale across the entire fretboard. The benefit here is that you get to use the scale more melodically, sort of more intentionally, when you focus on it in this way. So we're going to be using the A minor pentatonic scale. This is the A minor pentatonic scale starting on the E string 5th fret. You probably already know that shape. Hopefully we all do. It's ingrained in our souls, right? It's burned into our psyches. Let me demonstrate the problem we're trying to solve first. You probably already know this, but this scale, the notes from this scale occur all over the fretboard. And as they invert and move up the fretboard, they change shapes and change patterns. So this is the note, this is the scale starting and ending on the root. When you start on the 2nd note of the scale, you probably already know this, the pattern looks like this. When you start on the 3rd note in the scale, it looks different again. When you start on the 4th note of the scale, it's different again. And starting on the 5th note of the scale, it's yet again totally different. right? So when you're mapping the scale and you're trying to get sort of familiar with it and be able to use it all over the fretboard, you've got to remember, like, which note am I starting on? Is this where the minor third is, or is this a whole step? Where does it shift? Where do my hands need to shift and move? There's a lot there. And that information, like retaining all that information, is a barrier between you and playing the scale effectively. Because all you really want to do is use that information to make some music with, right? And these patterns and these shapes get in the way. This is the problem that Mark and I were having. So what we're going to do now is take that same scale, and we're only going to use one constraint. You're either going to be starting on your index finger, or you're going to be starting on your ring finger. And that's it. We're going to map the entire scale using those two constraints. Which finger am I starting on, right? It's actually a single constraint, but there are two elements to it, two different solutions. Okay, so here's how that works. Both of those solutions, starting on your index and starting on your ring finger, are present here in our home bass shape. The pentatonic scale is a 5-note structure. Starting on my index, watch this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the scale's over. I just happen to end here on my ring finger. If I play it from here using 5 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are two solutions, starting on the index and starting on the ring. Now we're simply going to take those two shapes, starting on our index, starting on a ring, and we're going to map the scale in both ways on each string. E string, A string, D string, and G string. Okay? That's it. Here we go. Let's get started. A on the E string. We already know where that is. 5th fret, index finger. We've done this a billion times. Start that same scale in that same position from this note using your ring finger. This is something you might not have done. There it is. Both versions from that same note on the E string. Right? Now, A on the A string, we're going to take it all the way up to the octave here. Starting on our index finger, same basic shape that we started with. In fact, it's identical. Starting on that same note with our ring finger, now it looks like this. Right? Boom, A string's done. D string, finding an A on the D string, here's one on the 7th fret. Index finger, shape looks like this. Watch the B string. Start the same scale from the same note using our ring finger. You should see that as the top half of our home bass shape. Right? Boom, done. G string. There's an A on the G string right there. Watch the B string. Starting with our ring finger. I'm going to take that up an octave because it's a little easier to see. Here's the A note. I would actually recommend, instead of starting it with the ring finger on this one, to avoid this weirdness, this is the only pattern or location I would suggest starting it with your middle finger. Because then you can get this cool little thing. That's ring finger, in this case middle, index. Right? We can't really do this on the B string because we run out of strings right away. And we certainly can't do it on the E string headed this way because we have no more strings. Unique thing about that is that you find the limits of the guitar. And let me just say this, it's always better for you to find the limits of the instrument than the instrument to be limited by your capability. It's a much better place to be. Okay, that's it. Starting and ending on your index finger, starting and ending on your ring finger, map the pentatonic scale to the E, A, D, and G strings, right? This keeps you in touch with the scale, the sound of the scale all the time, and mapping it in this way is a natural sort of holistic mapping where you get to play the scale over the entire neck, but you never have to worry about which shape is it? What position am I in? How is this going to look different? How are the shapes going to change? Because you're only using two basic mappings, the mapping with your index finger and the mapping with your ring finger. Well, as you can see, just using that simple constraint, that single constraint, starting on the index finger, starting on the ring finger, I stay connected to the scale at all times. I'm always playing the scale. I'm not worrying about whether or not the pattern or the shape of the pattern is this a minor third or is this a whole step, and where does it shift, right? All of that focus is on something else besides the scale. You might need those patterns and those shapes to get real technical prowess, right? To get your synchronization together, and that's what that's for. But if you want to get effective at playing the scale lyrically, like actually making some music with it, this is a much more powerful way to do it. Okay, tabs are on Patreon. Head on over there if you want to get the tabs. And if you do support the channel, again, thank you in advance. I hope you found this helpful. I hope it piques your interest and it provides you a new way to look at the pentatonic scale, which we're all going to be studying for the rest of our lives. I hope you've had a good time, and I'll see you next time. Okay, that's the intro. Curious guitarist.